36 Ways of Writing a Vietnamese Poem is it's a book length poem that consists of standalone smaller poems. And it's something that I didn't necessarily intend to write, but that when I was writing it, it dredged up, hauled up, pulled up all of these things that I'd been thinking about and taking notes about and even writing about ever since I started writing, so since before the short stories in the boat. And the deep core question in it is the one that the title alludes to, which is how does one write a Vietnamese poem? What does being Vietnamese mean in the context of a writer or a reader or a work? And it speaks to the trap that writers of of elsewhere can feel themselves in, which is, that they are expected to perform their authenticity, perform their suffering or their trauma or the history, to explain their culture in a way that can demean the mentness, the truth and profundity of these things, and the way in which the larger sort of ecosystem makes it quite easy for writers to fall into these loops where, you write about a certain thing in a certain way and you're reinforced in that by the ecosystem. And then the ecosystem can use that to sort of spin capital for itself, whether it's cultural or social or even political. And so that's a dry way of saying that I needed to feel that I was writing something that was true. And when I was writing a lot of what I've been writing since the boat, there was always, or often, let's say, a sense that, that this didn't ring completely true because it wasn't being completely transparent about how the world worked in relation to ethnic writing or publishing of a Vietnamese writer. And it didn't feel true because it didn't express all of my contradictions and uncertainties and confusions. And so I think part of the reason why I've written this in poetry and not prose is that stumbling along, I realized that when I was writing in prose, there was a sense that I knew what I was talking about. There was a sense of authority that I would be sort of creating through just the making of sentences. And it didn't really accord with the truth of how I felt. And it was hitting upon this structure of a poem that was consisting of smaller poems, each of which would sort of speak to, but also against the other poems, would destabilize and undercut, but also sort of reposition and reprism the other stories. It sort of felt true to me in the sense that this is a process. It's not a fixed thing. It's not an answer. It's a continual questioning, and that's what I hope the reader would also take away from this would be, it's a journey where you're just, you're finding your footing, and then you might be unfooted, and then you have to re-find your footing in a way that is hopefully, interesting and will give a larger sort of scope to the questions that the collection investigates. It varies. I'm very much a spurt writer, so I sort of like just lie fallow for ages while I'm sort of reading or thinking or taking notes. And then when I actually start writing, I sort of just, do it pretty intensely for as long as it takes. And so the environment just needs to not be too distracting, I guess. As long as I can sort of just burrow away somewhere, sometimes with headphones on, sometimes not, and sort of enter the zone of whatever it is I'm working on, then that's okay. Sometimes I like music, but for this book, I didn't listen to music at all. Especially with poetry, I think it might sound weird, but often I hear the stresses of the words and the way the words fit together before there are even words. So sometimes I'll have a scansion in my head, or um, I'll sort of be tapping on a line, trying to figure out what pattern best communicates what this line needs to do. And because, as you know, the poem, the long poem, consists of shorter poems, each of which is very, very different in its meter, its cadences, its rhythms. It was very much a process of finding the right form and the right meter to communicate the feeling that I wanted that particular poem to communicate. And so yeah, and then from that point on, it's a bit of everything. You know, sometimes there's just a word that to me feels like a beautiful word, and I need to get that word in, and I need to build a line around that word, and then I need to build lines around that line. And sometimes, you know, it's just that word or that image, or sometimes even just like a conjunction of syllables that needs to find its way in. It's a book that I had to fight a little bit to bring out into the world right now, in part because it wasn't what was contracted or expected, which is fair enough from the publisher's point of view. In part because it's poetry, and you know, poetry is a different beast to prose, both intrinsically and also the way in which the market, you know, parlays and leverages and moves the work. And the reason why I fought for it, and the reason why I think it's important for me that this book come out now, is because it expresses the moment for me, and it allows me to have a greater sense of possibility in my work. And it also provides a key or a legend for how to read the rest of my work, both the stuff before and hopefully the stuff to come as well.